Hello and welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Mindset with your hosts, Rye
and me, Miles Adams.
Today we're going over my introduction to regenerative agriculture, regenerative practices, a video series called Carbon Cowboys. This video series goes over 10 different ranching families and their transition from traditional ranching to regenerative ranching, which we'll talk about here. And then we're also going to teach you about all the amazing benefits that comes from this that are briefly, that's healthier cattle, healthier land, healthier water systems, more biodiversity, more animal and plant diversity, drought resilience, and flood resilience. Miles, take it away.
All right. Yeah, there's just tons of benefit to this, but it kind of starts off with talking about kind of the problems that come with the traditional grazing and ranching methods. And here we're talking about just kind of open pasture grazing, along with the forage and how you kind of treat your cattle. So traditionally, you would have just an open pasture where the cattle are just allowed to roam free on this kind of wide expanse of land. And while this, in my mind, I didn't see any problems with this. I thought that's great, pasture raised cattle.
Right, let them roam free.
Yeah, they're not on a feedlot. It definitely is better than feedlots, but it's not the best thing that you can be doing, because when the cattle are given this much freedom and this much open space, they tend to kind of pick and choose what to graze. They definitely have favorite plants and grasses to eat, and so they'll kind of target these ones and only graze those for as long as they can. And what this does is it kind of weakens the root systems of those really good plants that you want. And so year after year, you get less of the good plants and kind of less biodiversity with more plants that you don't necessarily want, but aren't maybe the best for the cattle.
Another thing that strikes me on this subject is it originally occurred to me that keeping cattle on this big open ranch is the most natural way to do it. But when they're all open and free and far apart from each other, that's actually not a natural condition. Big old herbivores that move in herds like that are usually much denser, much closer together in natural history, because they were under the threat of predators, so they didn't want to have one that was way far away from the pack, and they wanted to continue moving together, and that's what this new system reproduces.
Yeah. So kind of looking back at the historical context, the natural livestock that we had here was buffalo, and like you said, they stick together, move as a group, graze a field, move on, and might not come back for 2 years. So basically what the goal is to try to replicate this kind of natural grazing method through the creation of paddocks, and by splitting up your pastures into smaller areas where you can put a higher density of cattle. And kind of what they were saying in the Carbon Cowboys is, with kind of the higher herd density, there's almost more of a sense of competition between the cows. They feel like, I have to eat this grass that's in front of me right now, no matter what it is, or else somebody else will. It kind of incentivizes just kind of a more uniform grazing of the small paddock, so you don't have some things that aren't eaten and some things that are. But also it distributes their poop and urine a lot more evenly. Where I was listening to this guy speak, and he said with paddock grazing, you can get a equal amount of poop and urine per square yard on your pasture, versus with the open pastures, it's really pretty together in certain spots, and that much poop and urine can actually be toxic for the soil versus beneficial.
Just to drive home what the process is with the rotational, so it's called a rotational paddock grazing or adaptive paddock grazing, and that's you divide your like 100-acre big ranch into a bunch of 1-acre little squares, and you move the cattle through those squares. And these farmers put up temporary electric fencing, pop in a post, and run electric fencing around those paddocks and like move them between there every day. So let's just say they left them in each one for a day. And that's a little bit of a simplification, but we'll say that. So they go around and they end up going through those 100 acres. And just as Miles was saying it, all their fertilizer that the animals drop into the soil is equally distributed. The animals don't only eat their favorites; they eat their a little bit less favorites too. And they don't only eat the grass; they also like tumble it down with their fists, with their hoofs, and their weight on the soil is basically like plants seeds, steps on seeds, and let's put them just a little bit into the ground. And but the real magic occurs in that time when the land isn't being grazed. So 100 days later, like so on that 100-acre pasture, when they go through each acre, each paddock is only grazed one day, and then there's 100 days of rest time. And in those 100 days of rest time, these plants grow like 5 feet tall because they've been fertilized by those animals, and they're full of super healthy and super diverse plants. And that has so many run-on effects. Like when those plants are 5 feet tall, when those grasses are allowed to get big, and those wild legumes and wildflowers are allowed to get big, then it provides habitat for insects, which provides food for small rodents, which provides foods for predator birds. One of the really amazing stories in Carving Cowboys, somebody in Georgia talks about his conversion to regenerative ranching. There used to be nothing but cows and like a couple basic grasses in this area. But after a couple of years of applying regenerative practices, he found a bald eagle couple moved in, and like 10 years in, he has the biggest bald eagle sanctuary in all of Georgia. And it's again that process where those plants get big, and that allows insects to come in, allows rodents to come in, and then now there's this need for these predatory birds, and they find a home, and it's just like, it's so amazing, this knock-on cycle of life, just created by letting life do its thing.
It's just trying to, as much as you can, trying to imitate a natural ecosystem, and very quickly after that, it actually becomes a natural ecosystem. And on top of all that good stuff, they were talking about how their cows were more healthy as well, because with kind of a more diverse diet, they're getting more nutrients and kind of a wider array of things that are good for them rather than just their favorite plant. And this one guy from Canada was talking about on his 800 head ranch last year, he only had to like treat like 20 cows, versus he used to walk around with a crossbow and 3 big bottles of medicine. So on top of all this amazing ecological benefits, you're saving money on fertilizer, you're saving money on treatment for your cows. You don't have to irrigate your fields because they can hold so much more water. There are a lot of like business benefits along to the ecological benefits of paddock grazing.
Those are all so huge. I want to go in a little bit more depth with how the land can hold more water. It's kind of this process we've been talking about for a long time. When you let plants grow and those roots distribute themselves throughout the soil, and there's actually something really kind of cool that happens when grazers come eat grasses and plants like that. When the top half of the grass gets eaten, the grass will be like, whoa, I have way too many roots to support just this small amount of grass. I don't want to be maintaining all these roots when I don't have enough like chlorophyll, enough like solar, enough photosynthesis, to maintain them. So they like cut themselves off. They're like, okay, I'm not going to use these roots anymore. So then when those roots aren't being maintained, now the fungal networks move in, and they start degrading those roots, creating nitrogen, and allowing areas for water to filtrate through the soil. And this is a huge difference from those continuously grazed fields where there's barren land, where there's no roots, where those plants are never allowed to get big because the cattle will eat them before they get big. They never get roots that go way down. And that huge benefit of having roots that are able to go all the way down enables water to soak into the fields. And it's such a huge difference. Like, they tell stories. Yeah, you got this?
This guy from South Dakota, he was talking about he started this paddock grazing almost 26 years ago. And he was talking when he started, his pastures were able to take, I think, a half inch of rain per hour. By the time Cowboys was
that
made,
is like they could soak in, right? That's like
yeah. So
cool.
That's actually into the ground versus like water running off and kind of going into the stream, going downstream, and then going into the ocean. So cool. This is water in the ground where it's supposed to be. And so by the time Cowboys was made, he got up to, I think, just about 8 inches of rain per hour can be actually soaked into the ground. And I just recently, the other day, I heard him speak at this summit, and his statistic at the summit was, I think, 13 inches.
Wow. It's like 26 times as many.
Of heavy rain. That's over a long period of time, of course, but it's still an incredibly drastic increase. I honestly didn't know that land could take in 13 inches of rain in an hour.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was possible. Like, that's a lot of water. And they show photos ranches after big rains. His is totally fine. Other ones have just these giant pools in the middle of their pasture. It's just standing there, or it's like big runoff ruts and
huge amounts of erosion, like dirt in the soil.
Yeah. All that stuff just goes downstream.
And when it goes downstream, it causes so many problems. It's like,
yeah,
even though this isn't in like an industrial farm, there's not those kind of fertilizers. There's still like animal runoff, like animal food's really good for the soil, but we don't want it in like human water systems. And when you got those big floods that run off those big fields, they'll take all that animal fertilizer and put it into the downstream effects, which can affect like cities and water bodies downstream. Also, when that water is allowed to escape and doesn't soak in, then it creates floods for people, and that's a huge danger, huge problem.
And when you are using those industrial fertilizers, you see the algae blooms at the mouths of the river where it meets the ocean, and then those dead zones. Kind of like the Mississippi River. There's a giant dead zone from all the algae blooming because of the fertilizer taking up all the oxygen in the water, and then nothing's able to survive. Yeah. So water saturation is good for multiple reasons. It can make your field way more drought resistant. He was talking. They planted their cocktail mix of forage, and they only got like maybe 1/10 of an inch of rain, and it was still like the 5 feet high, because there's so much water stored in the ground. They're not as dependent on rains.
And then that's why we're talking. There's the drought resilience, and like even when it doesn't rain for a long time, the land has soaked that up like a sponge, and it's able to give that back up to new plants and able for like big trees to be able to tap into that. And that's specifically opposed to that land that can only infiltrate half an inch. That's it rains yesterday, it's dry today. The sun can like make it out that fast. But when the soil has all those little holes and all those healthy fungal networks from those old roots, then the water is able to soak all the way in, and then it can be like moist for months after a rain.
Yeah. Anything else in this video?
How about some of the like human impacts or the business impacts?
Oh yeah. Just pure herd side. You can almost double your your heads of cows that you would have on your pasture in the paddocks. You can have more cows on less land, and as long as you cycle it right and you give it enough time to recover, the land can fully provide for that number of cows. That's more profit. And then you're not paying for fertilizers, you're not paying for herbicides, all that stuff. You're fertilizing your land for a profit, basically.
So big. That's literally like your land produces twice as much food as it would otherwise. It's able to feed twice as many cattle as it would otherwise.
That's huge, yeah. That's double your profits. And even more so because you're minimizing expenses. Trying to think of anything else.
I really liked one of their points. You kind of touched on it about the medicine, like the cattle needing less medicine. Mm-hmm. Somebody said they reduced their medical bills to 1/10 of what they used to be, where they're not using antibiotics or growth hormones for the cattle anymore, and it's for all those reasons that you talked about. And I really liked how he explained it about the when the cattle are walking into that brand new paddock that's been growing for 100 days, and it has these like big 5 feet tall, these alfalfa and all these cool grasses. The cattle is able to self-medicate. It has this whole like buffet, this giant salad bar, and that's like the cattle know what plants are good for them, and based on how they're feeling, so they can go out there and like, I need some of this, and that's how they're so much healthier. And I think that's so cool.
Yeah, no, they were talking about traditionally they would kind of monoculture even the forage, just because it's easier to manage.
Right. So can you explain what the forage is for everyone?
Let go. Yeah, the forage is just everything that the cattle eat. So all the plants, even some of them may be considered weeds. They talk about legumes. I personally don't know what a legume is, but the forage is just what the cattle eat, the plants they eat on pasture. And so traditionally, they were talking about it's easier to monoculture. So just plant alfalfa. So if you see anything else, that's bad and to spray it. But once you kind of let go of this management idea that you have to manage what's growing and that what your cow is eating, they realize that it's so much less work to just let it grow freely, and then just have a biodiverse option of foods. And that's what gives the cattle their balanced diet, which causes them to need less medication and antibiotics. And on top of that, it sequesters more carbon because it's growing so rapidly. It gets chopped down in kind of a stressful environment for the plant, and then it thinks, I need to regrow really quick. Let me do all of this photosynthetic stuff and grow really fast, and that's what sequesters the most carbon. So it's all connected. That's the one thing I've kind of been able to take away from every video I've watched, is that there's this crazy complicated, but not that complicated, but just intricate network of connections between kind of everything that happens naturally.
Huge echoing. It's like such a complex interweaving system of cycles. And I'd say that's absolutely, or like, I totally agree with you that that's present in everything that we've watched. But like how making a little difference in the water system or making a little difference in how you treat your cattle can have such huge runoff benefits for all of nature. And I think we get there from analyzing all those connections and trying to figure out what would help, kind of noticing nature cycles and being like, okay, yeah, we can help it this way.
I think you touched on.
You go.
I think you touched on something really important, and that's just to pay attention to nature. That's something that this guy talked about in this summit. he was like, nature is always trying to tell us something. It's just whether we choose to listen or view it as a problem. He talked about weeds in his crop pastures, which he also integrates livestock in, but it's not the primary grazing cat pastures. He was talking, if I see a dandelion, like on the ground, some people would think, oh, that's a weed, I got to go spray it. He sees, oh, my soil might be lacking calcium, which is what the dandelion puts back into it. Each thing has a specific job and is there for a reason almost. Whether we choose to accept that reason or not, even if it doesn't totally work with our exact plan. So yeah, he sees this grass that's a really dense root grass. The soil might be a little too compact, and the grass is there to kind of break it up. And kind of each thing is telling you something.
If you're only ready to pay attention.
Yeah, you just gotta listen.
Wow, that's so cool. I hadn't heard it expressed that way, that like you pay attention to what the soil's producing and it tells you like what it needs or what it has a lot of. That's so cool.
I think that was a really good representation of the regenerative mindset, this kind of accepting wildness that we've kind of been touching on. And that it's all important, it's all meaningful.
One last thing I want to get to on the carbon cowboys is like how their transition to this regenerative paddock grazing, this adaptive paddock grazing systems affected their personal lives.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple like directions we can take this. It's kind of like their social life. Like a lot of these people are traditional ranchers turning into non-traditional ranchers, and it's kind of something that like in their social spheres are like, whoa, dude, what are you doing? You know, and all these people have had their ranches passed down through their families for like 3 generations. It's kind of like, Dad, I really think this is a good idea. Dad's like, we've always done it this way. This is a way to do it, you know. I don't know. Let's go for that social aspect first. What else comes to mind for you?
Things that come to mind, just what you were saying. It's passed down through generations. This is not an easy decision, because it means so much to you personally. But I think what they're seeing is that this is going to allow them to pass their ranch down for generations to come, because they're reinvigorating their soil, reinvigorating their pastures, and making it something that can actually be sustainable. Another thing that comes to mind is the really cool guy from Canada with the jorts, snazzy jean shorts. But he was talking, it might look like a lot of work, the paddock grazing, because you got to move the cows, and kind of be finicky with it a little bit. But once you get it down, he can lay a 1/4 mile of electric fence in 18 minutes. And he has much more free time than he did before, having to go all over his property looking at different cows that are all spread out, and kind of having to watch them very closely, for medicine, for multiple reasons. But he actually has more free time than he did in the past.
So cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And that's more free time for family, more free time for like taking care of the business, marketing, and things like that.
Yeah.
Huge impact. Kind of next on that, like, let's go kind of for that like personal business side. I heard a lot of the ranchers talking about there's a growing market for regeneratively raised meats, and that's a big plus for them when they can sell like, we're taking care of the world this way.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I cut out.
Oh, you're all good. All good. There's just a big boost to business too when they can be saying that they're growing it
Mhm.
through regenerative methods.
But yeah, and like you might be able to even charge a little bit more. Like, organic is more expensive than non-organic. And not only is your business method more efficient, but you're also just getting more revenue from your product with a higher amount of product.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to bring it to a question for us, kind of traditional like urban people, how our consumption habits would affect all of that. And I kind of hesitate with the word like responsibility, but I think we should remember that we can make a big difference by like paying attention to where we're buying our food from, and supporting the efforts we really believe in.
Yeah. I mean, as the buyer, we have the power. We have the money that people want, and it's just our decision where to put it. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot how you kind of get out what you put in. And I think buying sustainably and regeneratively is not only better for yourself, I think it's more nutritious. You're treating your body better. But like you said, it's incentivizing these regenerative practices. It's rewarding people for taking care of the earth. And I would like, on a bigger federal level, I would love to see some of these big industrial agriculture grants go to regenerative farmers, versus
Absolutely.
single monoculture cash crops that get paid before they even harvest.
There's so much to be said here. Like we could do a whole episode just on it, but my like a kind of cursory understanding is that like the government puts out they have like a farm bill every year, and in that farm bill, since the New Deal has been a federal guarantee for basic crops, including corn. So like a subsidy that says like, just for planting this corn, we're gonna give you like 30. I don't know the number, but we'll give you like $1 a bushel. So it's like for every big section of corn, we'll give you $1 just for planting it. Like it doesn't even have to work. If there's a big drought that hits or a big dust storm that hits, it's okay. We'll guarantee it. It's like a federal guarantee for farmers. And it sounds nice in its like first idea, but it ends up being destructive now that we know so much about how monoculture, like monocropping corn can be so dangerous.
Yeah. And it doesn't incentivize you to, like, I do like the idea of kind of almost an insurance for like drought or like natural disasters. Like, these are things you can control. But at the same time, there's no incentive for you to make your land better, for you to kind of improve anything if you're getting paid before you even harvest. At that point, it's not about the harvest, really.
Yeah, it's like not about your land either.
No.
One of the really interesting kind of knockoff negative effects of this corn subsidy that I learned about from The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. Recommend that book for sure. He talked about, so there are these things, confined feeding operations called CAFOs, or like factory farms, and that's where a bunch of cows are put in these big like just dirt patches with troughs full of manufactured feed, basically, and most of it is made of corn. And the crazy thing is that it costs more for a farmer to produce corn than it does to produce like hay or alfalfa and stuff like that, grasses that are actually healthier for the cattle than the corn. But because of the government subsidy, corn costs way less on the marketplace than it does as a cost to produce it. And that's even less than those hays do. So instead of a farmer keeping cattle on their land and raising hay for them, they instead the cattle are kept at these confined feeding operations and fed corn that's more expensive to grow than the hay. And when we're talking more expensive to grow than the hay, that means it takes like more time, more water, more energy. So it's like more intensive for the earth too. And the cattle are less good at eating corn. It creates all kinds of problems for their digestion. You know, they're meant to eat grasses, not grains.
Now you gotta do all these growth hormones and inject all this stuff into the cows to try to make up for it.
Yeah.
And that just it's just a cycle. It just kind of continues to go downward.
And we can do it so much better.
Yeah.
By all the processes described, this is like, it's such a hopeful thing for me to be like learning about, talking about, discussing these things. I like these regenerative practices.
Yeah. No, I think with coronavirus and everything, I was kind of losing a little bit of hope for the future. And that was just kind of there, just going about my everyday life. But when everything stopped, you kind of have a second to step back and look at it. And I was like, dang, this looks pretty bleak. Things are not looking too good. And just regenerative farming kind of in general has kind of instilled a new hope that there are things that we can do to not only slow it down, but just reverse.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm hoping next week's episode we can do it on the Soil Conservation Summit you talked about.
Yeah. Really.
You and I talked about off air. Maybe you can give everybody a brief teaser of what we might talk about next week.
Oh yeah, for sure. So basically, the last few days there was a summit called the Soil Regeneration Summit. Hope for the future, which just basically had a bunch of kind of big names in the regenerative community come and speak virtually. And it was really great. There were some truly inspiring speakers from all over the world. So we're not just talking America here. We're talking kind of a global effort. And yeah, that was great. I really hope the replays stay up and we can kind of get something situated for you guys, because they had a lot of really, really good things to say. That like really, really impacted the way I think about it even now. Like, yeah, some really good speakers.
Hell yeah! To me, it's so inspiring to see that, like, you know, the movement's coming around. This is the first time this Soil Region Summit has happened, and it's like, you know, the beat of the drums is getting louder for this movement, and that's and I'm happy to be a part of it with you and see that it's gaining momentum in so many other spaces too.
Yeah, no, it's definitely growing really fast, which is super exciting.
Any closing notes for everybody, Miles?
Not to come to mind straight off the dome. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Go watch Carbon Cowboys. It's a really good short YouTube docu-series.
Links in the podcast description as always.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty.
Sweet. Peace, everybody.
Yeah.
Take care.
Hope you guys have a good one.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
Yeah. Thank you.